Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. Today we'll be learning how to create a tooltip kind of like this inside of Wix Studio using CSS styling. We're going to talk about the global CSS sheet, how to add custom classes, and how to write the styling rules to create something like this. And before we get started, I just want to invite you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss awesome content like this that's coming out on a weekly basis. So once you've done that, or if you're already subscribed, let's get started. Okay, so here I am inside of Wix Studio, and the first thing we're going to do is add in an element that we can add a tooltip to. So I'm going to go right over here, up here to add elements, and I'm just going to grab, to start with, this text element. And now that we have this text element on screen, we're going to have to turn on code mode in order to add the CSS style sheet to our site. So I'm going to go right over here where it says code, and I'm going to click right over here where it says Start Coding. And once we've done that, so we have the entire code panel, but what we really care about today is this plus add global CSS. So I'm just going to go ahead and give that a click. And you can see that as we do that over here, we have this CSS style sheet, which is added to the site. And we have some examples here from Wix. And what we're going to do is we're going to be creating our own custom style. And in order to do that, I'm just going to go over here. Okay, and you can see that as I was practicing for this video, I already created this style here, tooltip. But if you don't have that here, you can always just type. So you just type tooltip, like right over here, and then just click enter, and it'll create a new style for you. And this panel here on the side is essentially where we assign a certain class to an element. So let me take a step back and just talk about CSS classes in a brief nutshell, just for those of you who might not be so familiar. Okay, so what is CSS? CSS is essentially the language that we use in order to style in the web. So you may not be familiar with it if you've been using Wix and you've done all your styling through the Wix editor, but essentially what Wix does is it takes all the stuff that you put inside of, let's say, the design panel over here for a specific element, and it translates that into CSS and applies it to the elements on your website. So it does kind of all that legwork for you. And here, essentially, what we have the option to do is to utilize the language directly and write our own rules for the styling that we wouldn't otherwise have access to through what Wix exposes in its design features. And the way this language works is essentially we have something called classes. I'm simplifying here. There are other parts of this language except for just classes, but to simplify things for the purpose of this tutorial, we'll say that this language has something called classes, which are essentially categories of elements to which we apply general styling rules. Okay, so we say this element is part of this category, and so these X styling rules will apply to it. So let me hop in and show you an example of that right over here. So to give an example, let's use this text element that we've already added to the canvas. And you'll see here on the side in the code panel that this text element has these global text classes. And these are classes that Wix pre-adds to all of the text elements on the site. And essentially, if we were to change the rules within one of those categories, within one of those classes, that would apply to all of the text elements on our site. So let's go ahead and try and make some changes and see how that affects the element. So I'm going to go right over here, back into our global.css. I'm going to get rid of this kind of boilerplate instructions that Wix provides. And we're going to select one of the classes here that applies to our text. And I'm going to choose to use the rich text underscore text. It might be underscore underscore text. It's a little hard to see. But in order to select a class, what we're going to do is we're going to add a dot. And then we're going to start writing out the class name. And luckily, Wix has autocomplete here, so I don't have to guess what it is. I can just select it from right over there. And then you'll see that we're opening up curly brackets right after that. And now essentially we can write all the rules for our text. So let's say, for example, I want all of my text to be color red. So what I can do here is write here color, and then just write the word red, and that should apply to all of the text on my site. Okay, pretty straightforward. And you'll see that it's not only this text element here, but if I was to go and add another text element in, it would also be red. Okay, it's a global rule. It applies to all of the text elements on my site. So now let's say I want to apply something only to a specific element on my site. So I have a special element and I want to apply a class only to it. So in order to do that, we can create our own classes, except for the global classes that Wix provides. So I'm just going to go ahead and select this element that we have over here. And I'm going to go over here to the side panel under the CSS classes. And here we have this area where we can define custom classes. And to define a custom class, all you have to do is just start typing in the name of the class and click enter. You can see here the classes that you already created, so just like the tooltip that I was showing you before. So that is an example of a custom class, and I created another one here called special text. And by selecting it, I've applied that custom class to this element, and I can apply multiple such classes to any element. And essentially what this is going to allow us to do is to create a unique set of rules that applies only to the elements that have this custom class applied to it, so that I don't have to blanket change all of the elements of a certain type. So in order to change to utilize this custom class, essentially, let's go ahead and I'm going to get rid of what we have over here. And I'm going to select that custom class. So it's going to be special text, and then open the curly brackets. And let's do again color red. And as I change it, you can see here that nothing has happened. And that's because within Wix, because it also has the global classes, sometimes you have to address a specific global class when you're assigning a custom class. So the special text that I'm applying now, I need to determine if that's going to be applied here to the rich text part of the element or to the rich text underscore underscore text part of the element. And this is something that's a little unique to how Wix has set it up here. So if you have this situation where you're trying to apply a certain CSS class, you'll want to try and do something like I'm doing now, which is to set up a rule where it's special text. And then here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add dot rich text underscore text, and just get rid of these extra curly brackets that got added in. And now you can see that it is being applied. Okay, and this is just basically a way of kind of nesting CSS. So it tells you an element that is rich text underscore underscore text that's within the class of special text. So you'll see now that if I go ahead and I add in another text element right over here that doesn't have that custom class applied, then it just stays the original color, which is black, and the other one is red. So that's how to create a unique custom class and apply it to an element. So now that we have a basic understanding about how CSS works and how we apply it in Wix, let's hop in and actually do what we're trying to do today, which is to apply a tooltip or kind of like a small pop-up with information next to a certain element. So in order to do that, first of all, we'll apply the custom class that I created for the tooltip. Okay, so if you were lost before, now hopefully you're with me. And I'm going to go over here into my global.css, and I'm going to select that tooltip class. Okay, but this tooltip is not something that we want to change on the element itself. It's kind of something that we want to add beside the element, right? It's not an actual change to the color of the text, let's say. It's something that's going to be next to the element. So in order to do that, we're going to utilize a CSS property called before or after. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead here and select after. And this essentially what it does is it adds a new element with the CSS properties that we're going to define here after. And after, in terms of HTML, I'm not going to dive into it too much, but after the current element. So here, for example, if I was to say content, which is a way to define the content of a certain element. So let's say text content, and I'll say here test. And you can see here that as soon as I wrote that, this little test thing popped up. Okay, right over here. Let me add like a little more styling just so it's a little more clear. So let's say we'll have a background color of black, and I'll change the color of the text itself to white. And let's say we'll have padding of, let's say, 5 pixels. And we'll do border radius 15 pixels just to make it rounded a bit. Awesome. This says to view the style, go into preview. Okay, we'll check that out in a moment. And so that's looking pretty good. I'll just show you what it looks like. I mean, it doesn't look so good in the editor, but hopefully in preview mode it will look good. And if I just go into preview mode, let's take a look at it over here. Yeah, so that's looking okay. It's kind of looking like a tooltip. Maybe I'd reduce the border radius a bit, but whatever. Styling is styling, and you can go ahead and read all the rules and change it to make it look how you want. But we have one big issue here now, is that the tooltip is always showing. And we want the tooltip to, for example, show only when you hover on the element. That's pretty standard practice. So let's go back to the site. And in order to implement that, all we'll have to do is here, right after the tooltip, we're going to add another property of hover. Okay, and you can see here already that the tooltip has disappeared. And if I go into preview mode and I hover over the element, then we see our tooltip. Okay, so it's already behaving a lot more like a tooltip. And all we need to do now is kind of finish styling it and also maybe change its position. Okay, so you might want to like move it to a specific place, like let's say here to the upper right, so we can do that as well. So let's head back into the editor and fix those things up. Okay, so first let's deal with kind of moving the tooltip to somewhere slightly different. So let's say to the upper right portion of the element, and maybe it'll even cover the element a little bit. So in order to control that, I'm going to change the position of the tooltip to absolute. And I'm going to add a transform. And just so you know, the order that you write these rules in doesn't matter unless two rules conflict, and then the later rule will take on. The same goes for classes. So the classes that you apply that are written later inside of your global CSS will take precedence if both are applied to an element, just so you know. So I'm going to add here transform. And it's been a while since I've written CSS, so I think it's maybe, let's see, translate y, x, y. No, translate x. So it's going to be translate x. X is to the side, y is up and down. And let's say we'll translate x 50%. And let's see what that looks like. That should move it 50% to the right. So let me go ahead and check out what that looks like. Okay, that barely moved it. That barely nudged it. So what I can do is, I think let me try setting, and this is just all playing around with CSS. So I hope I don't bore you, but let's say it's like right 0, and let's take a look at that. And suddenly you kind of like appreciate, okay, so there we go. So now I got it to the right side and it's kind of hovering there. Let's say we want it to be on top. So I can just do that with like top. So let's do top 0. And I hope you're appreciating now how much Wix actually does for you with all the styling. Like think every single thing that you change in Wix design, it's all these lines of CSS that you would have otherwise had to write. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. It's kind of on the upper right. I don't think I even needed that translate 50% X, but anyway, you could play around with it. You might want to add like a little more styling. Like I think the border radius might have been a little too much. So maybe 10 pixels would have been nicer. Maybe kind of increase the padding a bit to 7%, 7 pixels, sorry. And you'll notice, like, it's also important to notice here, like, Most of the things that I'm writing here are not in quotation marks, like only this content is because that's actually text. But otherwise it's all kind of, yeah, it's all kind of just not in quotation marks because that's how CSS is written. So what did I say I wanted to do? So we rounded that out, maybe make the text a little bigger. So I'll do here, let's say font size, 14 pixels. It's rather large, but let's take a look and see what it looks like. Yeah, okay, I think that looks pretty cool. Um, Definitely is a tooltip and gets the message across. Next, I want to talk about some of the complexities of this and possible ways that we can overcome them. So one challenge that we have within the CSS in Wix environment is the fact that we're lacking a little bit of dynamism. And what am I saying here is that here, so I set the content to be test, let's say, and that means that essentially I will have to create a custom class for every single element that has a unique tooltip. Okay, so let's say I have several elements that the tooltip is test, then I can just apply this tooltip to them all. But if I have several different elements and each one needs its own different tooltip, then I will have to define custom classes for every single element, which is possible, but it's just a little cumbersome. What you could do is you could split the classes. So for example, we could have tooltip, which is everything essentially except for the content, and then just have another class which defines the content specifically for a tooltip. So that will save us a little bit of coding. And let me show you an example of what that would look like. So for example, this will be just our tooltip. So I'm going to get rid of the content and I'll show you what this looks like. We probably won't see anything now because there is no, yeah, there's nothing inside actually to give it, we didn't define like a default height and width, so we're not seeing anything. But if I go here, sorry, and I go ahead and add in, let's say, another class here, and let me call it tooltip content 1. Okay, just for example. Okay, tooltip content 1. And then I go ahead here, and under this CSS class, I go ahead and I'll actually copy this just to try and save us some time here and end up just doing double work in the end. I'm going to get rid of everything that we have here inside, and I'm going to change this to tooltip content 1. And here I'll define the content. So I'll say content, and we'll have here test. Okay, so I'm essentially applying 2 custom classes to this now. One general one for the tooltip styling, and one just to define the content of the tooltip. So let me go over here now into preview mode. And when I hover, so you can see that it kind of combines those 2 rules together. So I've essentially saved myself the hassle of needing to copy everything multiple times and just needing a special class for the content of the tooltips, which is already pretty, pretty good. Let me show you here how I would actually do that. So for example, I'll go and add in another text element. So this is the second add a title, and I'm going to give it the tooltip class, okay, so that we have a tooltip in general. And I'll define another tooltip content class. So tooltip, you can't see what I'm doing, now you can. Tooltip content 2. Okay? And here, inside of our global CSS, I'm just going to go ahead and copy what we have here. And I'll change this to number 2. And I will say here, hello world. Okay? And let's head into preview mode. And now you can see that here this has a tooltip of test, and this has a tooltip of hello world. Okay? You can see here now that the styling is a little off and needs to be played with, but you can understand the idea. Okay, so that's one way to approach this need for various tooltips. It still is slightly cumbersome because if you have many elements with different tooltips, you're kind of not so dynamic. And this is typically something that you would do by, let's say, adding an attribute to specific elements via JavaScript or via the HTML. But those are, I'm not going to say impossible via Wix, just probably even a bigger headache than what I'm doing over here. If you know otherwise, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear about a better way to do this if you have an idea. So we're going to wrap up here for today, and just to do a brief recap, we talked about CSS classes and applying CSS inside of Wix Studio, how to define classes, how to write the styling rules for classes, and how to utilize that in order to create these really cool tooltips. We talked a bit about how to scale that and create different tooltips for different elements. If you thought of any cool ideas after that, or you want to share how you're using this in your project, please do that in the comments below. I also want to take this opportunity to invite you to our monthly member-only live stream, which will be happening on June 3rd, Monday, June 3rd. So if you're interested in that, you can hop on. If you can't make that one, then we'll be having them monthly from now on. If you have any questions about Wix, Velo that you need answered, you need help with your site, you can hop on and I will be there live to provide assistance and guidance within the extent that I can over a live stream. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys. And if not, then I will see you at next week's video. So I'll see you next time.